We all try to do our parts here as part of the team, and one of the things that I have tried to do at these 2 p.m.s is to news conferences is to talk about the economic aspect of the pandemic, both in terms of how it affects business, how it affects the workforce, and no doubt one of the more popular questions we have received has been about unemployment compensation over the past few weeks, not just getting questions at the personal level and the macro level, but also really acknowledging the fears and frustrations that people have had. And one of the things I have felt that we need to do a better job of is getting more answers out there. So I spent the last week really trying to dig down and ask the right questions, make sure that we were on track to determine where things are. And what I want to do right now is to share with you what I found from that inquiry. I believe that all the folks working at ODJFS, they understand this, that they understand that there are fears and frustrations, and that they know that the level of customer service that they have been providing needs to get better. To put some perspective on this, the system was built in 2004. That's the computer system. It's a mainframe COBOL system, very outdated in terms of technology. It's not a cloud-based system. It was, they have a plan to create a cloud-based system which will create more efficiencies and enable you to do things much more quickly, but that system doesn't exist right now. So we're in this battle with the system that we have. And it worked well. When the unemployment rate was 4%, it worked fine, both in terms of technology and staffing. It was adequate for the task that it was being called to do. But, and to put this in perspective, pre-pandemic, there were 42 people working in the call center. And that was sufficient to do the work that it was being asked to do. Now there are 1,194 people working in the call center, and that still is not enough. There are many other agencies who've loaned employees to ODJFS to do this. They are scaling up new people as fast as they can, but they have a limited number of trainers and a limited number of people that they can take through that training at a time. And so they're staffing that up, as they've told me, as fast as they can. I want to put this in perspective because I talk about pre-pandemic versus now. More claims were filed in the last month than in the last 2 years. And that puts in perspective, what the challenges that they're facing. I asked the question, phones and processing claims, why not add more? And they are. They assured me that they are, and that one of the things that I think many people, including myself, didn't have a full appreciation for is that, during the pandemic, we talk about a call center. Well, it's not a call center. It's not like there are physically people there. Because of the pandemic, we can't have people physically there in that close proximity with one another. But they're doing this from a distance. They have the technology that allow people to do this from their homes, and upgrading that and upskilling that technology and upskilling the people to do that was part of this process. That has been done and is underway as they continue to try to improve upon the system, the unemployment comp system. This is what I was promised will happen over the course of this week. That they will add text to speech capabilities. Those have already added. Those should create some efficiencies. They will onboard an additional 337 staff once this training that I talked about is complete. Before the end of the week, they will introduce an interactive voice recognition system and bot technology that will provide 2 ways to answer those frequently asked questions, so you don't have to wait online and talk to an actual person. We can get that moved through the process more efficiently. By the end of next week, the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services has promised the following. They will launch a virtual call center to speed up wait times for people who need to call to talk to someone at the office. So they're going to add that. They will add they will begin the process. They will begin processing the additional $600 a week payments authorized under the Federal CARES Act. They will launch an online tool that is being developed for self-employed 1099 workers to get in line early. And this is important, so if you fall into that category, by the end of next week, they will have the application process available, although they will not be able to process those claims for payment until May the 15th. But by the end of next week, they have promised that they will have the online early application process available. They also promised that they will launch e-application improvements by next week to improve the individual services for customers. I will also add something that is very important that may save individual customers some time. Remember to, when you're applying, to enter a mass layoff number of 2000180. This eliminates the need to verify your employer if you enter this number, 2000, so 2,180. And that will speed up the process of verifying who your employer is and should help get that claim processed faster. On May the 1st, ODJFS expects to be able to process applications for people who are entitled to an additional 13 weeks of unemployment under the CARES Act. So those who are added, the 13 weeks, that is coming on May the 1st. So these are the things that they have promised are on the way to continue to improve the service. I guess the message is that that we and they hear you, that they have added capacity, they will continue to add capacity and tech tools that will help improve this. But the bottom line is that this process will not stop improving until everybody is served, and that reassurance that everything that you're eligible for will be backdated to that time. And we spent a lot of time going through this with the folks at ODJFS. They have committed to those timetables for those improvements. And I just want to reassure you that until it's delivering the level of customer service that people deserve, they will continue to make those improvements.